Hi there, my name is Nisha and I'm with Monte Carlo. And today I'll be interviewing Theresa Kushner, the Data and Analytics Practice Head at NTT Data. Theresa Kushner is so passionate about data analysis and how it gets applied to today's business challenges. For over 25 years, she's led companies like IBM, Cisco, VMware, and Dell in recognizing, managing, and using the information on data that has exploded exponentially. Using her experience in journalism, she's also co-authored 2 books, which is how we got to know her, Managing Your Business Data from Chaos to Confidence with our friend Maria Villar, and also B2B Data-Driven Marketing, Sources, Uses, and Results with Ruth Stevens. Today, as the Data and Analytics Practice Lead for NTT Data, Theresa continues to help companies gain value from data and information. She concentrates specifically on how companies are applying AI, MLOps, and overall governance to their everyday data challenges. For her efforts in leading analytics, Theresa was inaugurated as analytics practitioner into the Analytics Hall of Fame at Pace University in New York last year. So with that, I am so excited to speak with Theresa Kushner. Theresa, it's so great to finally meet you. I've heard so many wonderful things. Full disclosure, I've listened to some of your other interviews, and no, I'm just so impressed with your background. I mean, you've served in several data executive positions at IBM and Cisco, and all those things. I guess I'd just love to hear, from your perspective, what is it that you love the most about data, and what got you interested in the data world in the first place?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. I'm probably the last person in the world that should have ever gotten involved in data. I went off to college to become a journalist because my dad owned a computer business when I was in high school, and he made me work at that computer company on Saturday. And so I swore, like all good teenagers, that I would never, ever, ever go into the computer business. Yeah, and I've spent the rest of my life in a computer sort of area. But I went into the marketing side of the house, and when I was in Europe, it became very apparent that I couldn't do marketing if I didn't know who I was selling to, and I didn't. And so I started looking for data inside IBM that would help me market better, and discovered that it wasn't in shape to be used for marketing. It was to be used to ship products or to understand, what we were doing from a support perspective, but it wasn't for marketing. We didn't know anything about those customers. And it was the day when you were starting to get internet traffic. And so knowing about that customer meant you had to know what they were doing online as well as what they were doing offline. And we were doing B2B marketing, which is very different. I used to always kid some of my data friends about the guys that talk about analytics and data usually talk about it from a consumer perspective, because there's a lot of data and people understand it very well, and dealing with individuals is easy. Kind of. But B2B is different because you don't know necessarily who you're dealing with. And the entity called a company does have sort of a way of responding to marketing messages, but people inside that make up the collective. And so it's difficult. It's a little bit more difficult, sort of like, Ginger Rogers doing everything that Fred Astaire did, only backwards. And so this is what we do in B2B marketing. We sort of, we improvise. And that data got me really interested. What I discovered is that I was really interested in how to put it together, but that the IT organization didn't know very much about it and didn't really care. In fact, Maria Villar was one of the very first people at IBM I ever ran into that really knew what we were talking about. And her degree was in information science. It wasn't necessarily in core IT. Right. Which was really helpful for me, because then I found people that I started to understand. And what I found, which is the other side of this, is that I found that the people that were in data were sort of like the librarian types. They were always sort of, heads down, and data had to be perfect, and you had to do this with it. And I thought, well, that's not what I want either. Data's not good for anything unless I can turn it into something that tells me who to sell to, what to sell, or who's going to do what with the next action. And so that became my passion in life, is making it work for people.
That's amazing. And so was that like making data work for people? Like, do you have any I guess for someone who's just starting out trying to figure out like a mess of data, do you have any
Mhm.
advice on like
Mhm.
just like first steps? Because that's
Yeah,
really
when I first started, I feel so old, but when I first started, we were talking about big data, and oh my God, it's because it was huge. It was going to be gigabytes or petaflops. It was going to be a huge amount of data. Today, in an afternoon, we create the kind of volumes of data we were talking about back then. But, it is, I think getting involved with data says you need, it's not for the faint of heart. You need to be very brave about what you do with it. But what has changed is it's no longer the data that's flowing in that's the important part. It's really using that information, whatever it is, to solve what your problem is. And one of the things I've discovered is that people are not very clear about articulating their problems. And data can solve anything as long as you tell them what it is you are working on. I had a data scientist that worked for me at Cisco that used to say, there are two ways to approach data. First of all, you can ask it a question. That's what most business intelligence does. You put data in one place, you do a little query, and you ask it a question, it produces an answer. Or you can put all of the data in one place and then make the data confess the question.
Wow.
Which is very, very different. And that's what that's the world we're in today, is that's what the Googles and the Facebooks of the world do, is that they make the data confess the question. In other words, look for trends or things that we can do from an artificial intelligence perspective that really set us apart, that make it different.
That sounds like another great book title for you.
Yeah, data confessions. I can see it now.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what you're working on right now at NTT and what
Right.
you're there.
Yeah, over the last couple of years, I've become really, really interested in, well, I was before. When I was at VMware, we started an analytics group to sort of help us understand what to do with advanced analytics. And advanced analytics led to the artificial intelligence world. And what do you do with AI? As I started to look at AI and I went from VMware to Dell, I started with Dell, the AI Center of Excellence, to try and figure out what you could do. The majority of artificial intelligence projects, first of all, are directed internally, and as was Dell's. But they're usually directed because somebody goes out and says, I got to get a data scientist. So they buy a data scientist, which is not an inexpensive effort nowadays. They put them in place, and then that data scientist spends 80% of their time putting the data in place to begin to do anything at all. Not a good use of time, money, or talent. And one of the things I have learned over the years is how to help manage that kind of talent. So when I started working on artificial intelligence, I started looking at what could I do to move AI forward inside companies. And I thought I need to be consulting on that more. So I went to work for NTT Data to help establish a practice in data as an asset. That just simply means, what are we going to do with data as you move forward with your company? Most data, like Doug Laney says in Infonomics, data is an asset, but we don't value it that way. It's not on the balance sheet. It's not carried on your net worth statement, but it is important. And because if you lose it, you have to replace it, and that costs money. If you sell the company, usually the only thing you sell nowadays is the information about who you were marketing to, but we're not valuing that data in a way that will get us, that will help us be more take caring of it. And as we've seen security and privacy concerns elevate across the world, we're now looking at how that data really is important to us. I just read just recently that there is, I believe, the guy who started the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, I think is his name, has a new kind of concept out about making sure that everyone has access to their own data, and that each individual's data, your health data, your activity data, all the identification data you have could be encapsulated in one capability. Then as the internet itself allows that capability to flow from entity to entity. That kind of stuff gets me real excited, because that's the kind of thing that I'm looking forward to the next generation doing something about.
I can tell you're so passionate about it, and I love that.
Everybody looks at me and goes, yeah, that's kind of a nerdy thing to be, but I do. I do. It changes the world.
Of course, it absolutely resonates, and especially like right now in a time, and something that you said is just really clicking with me, is that, we have, when you sell a company, what people want is they want the information, they want the data. Mm-hmm. Your data is your most valuable asset. And I'm thinking about all these companies that are getting acquired right now, and it's because of the customer base they built, and that's, could be customer data, it could be other marketing data. So it's just really, really fascinating.
Well, the most valuable companies in the world don't have anything but their data. Google, Facebook, Alibaba, they're not made up of assets, that are sitting in a warehouse for the most part. The only thing they have is the information.
Yeah.
That's what Stanford teaches, is the platform is the most important part.
That's true. Great point. And then I guess one of my other questions for you around that topic is, like, where do you think that data teams, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but where do you think that data teams should be focusing on? And also, what do you think that they should be worrying about right now? So I guess maybe it's like the same kind of.
Yeah, it's the same kind of question. What they should be focused on is what they're worrying the most about. That's the answer to the question. But I think that from a data perspective, getting your arms around the data in a company and what it's going to be. I mean, let's face it. One of the oldest adages in the world is that information is power.
Right.
Why do you think we have such arguments in companies over who's got the data? Is because data translates to information, and information is power. So you're going to have to see companies do things like break down the silos within their companies. I see this all the time. We've talked about it for 20 years. In fact, we just finished a survey at NTT back at the end of June. And the survey was about data and what people are looking at data. And then when I read it for the first time, when I read the results, I said, guys, I will bet you I can find a report that's 20 years old that says the same thing.
Wow.
And I did. Pricewaterhouse did a report in 2001 that looked almost exactly, talked about the same things that are bothering companies today that were bothering them in 2000. Have we made progress in some areas? In some areas, yes. But the number one thing that was prevalent then that is still a big issue is, how do you break down the silos of data? Marketing has their own database. Sales has their own database. Finance has their own database. So does HR and the research community. They've all got their own data. And the problem is that cheats a company out of understanding the completeness of what they have.
History repeats itself.
Mm-hmm.
That is so fascinating. And when you think about, I guess, as a person who would have to like bring all of those together, like what would you say to them? Like, how do you bring together?
That's been my number one issue as I've been here at NTT thinking about that. And I'm going to draw a few parallels. One of which is that it is not an issue of technology. Technology today far surpasses our ability to even understand how to use it. So it's not a technology issue. It is a cultural issue. It is with people themselves not wanting to share information, or thinking that if I do this, I'll lose my job. It is human nature. And the one thing that humans always do is that they protect themselves from loss. And if I feel I'm going to change to them is often considered loss. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to have to change to put my data in one place, that's a loss in some way. Mm-hmm. And we don't treat that way. We just think you should go change. Everybody got to change. I've seen more projects fail because we thought that the change management was nothing. We weren't even going to consider it when that was the thing that was most important. And today I see a lot of companies facing the very same things. It's the culture that has to change. In fact, I have this great example. I have a client a couple of weeks ago who was talking about, we're doing an AI install for MLOps. And the client was telling me from his business intelligence perspective, they felt very good about the way he had democratized BI. And I said, so how'd you do that? And he goes, well, it's kind of a long road. You know, we had a CFO and a vice president of accounting that didn't want to do anything different than we'd always done. And they wanted their data to be their data. He said, but then we had a change. We had a new CFO and a new VP of accounting, cost accounting. He said, and all of a sudden, my world did a backflip. He said, they were open. They didn't want to control that data. They were open to it. And it suddenly taught me what I've said all along, is that, you know, this is an old example, but fish rots from the head, is that whatever the leadership of the company is doing, however they are approaching the issue, down in the ranks, they feel it and they'll protect it. So my message has been to the leaders that I deal with, open your mind and see what the possibilities are with data. And don't let people say that I've got to have mine because and this, I've heard this 1,000 times. I'm in sales. I have to know the data. I don't need to share it with anyone else. You hold me responsible for what I sell. That's quite frankly like saying, I don't have to wear a mask because I don't have COVID.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. It's the same thing. You know, it's looking out for the other person.
There is so much in everything that you're saying. There's so much like psychology and self-preservation mm-hmm. and individualistic behavior that I think a psychologist would actually be really interested in.
And you thought this was just about data.
The more and more I learn about data, the more I realize that it's about people.
It's about people. Exactly.
And you would think that it would be so different. It would be people is the opposite of data, but
exactly.
People are the root of data, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I had a question about your data journey, having been in the space for quite some time. I'd love to understand what your pitfalls are. Like, what would you say are your three, or maybe if you can't think of three, maybe like a couple pitfalls?
I think I've always been too naive about my number one pitfall. I've always been too naive about because I love data so much, and I just knew it was important that everybody else would share that feeling that it's important. And I've made a lot of mistakes because, quite frankly, people didn't share that, you know. And the other part of it is that oftentimes sharing information about what it will take to make your data better puts you in a bad position because it's not cheap. And I remember when I went to work for VMware, they said, okay, here's 27 projects we're doing. You don't have any money. Go find out which one of these projects have data in it and then attach yourself to them. And I said, okay. And the first project that I found was a huge amount of money that they were going to spend on building a marketing database. And I said, no. We're going to build a company database for companies and everyone else in the company to use. And that was the only way I got the money. But understanding how to sell that took me 15 years to figure that out. You know, it should have been easier than that because people put money on what they believe in. And quite frankly, you can see they don't believe in data because the data budgets are non-existent in most IT organizations.
And maybe that is a great, maybe that's why you became, the first data evangelist.
Yeah, I guess.
You have
I
to,
guess.
it's you're selling the message. You're selling other people to understand, I guess, the business, behind data, much like your books.
Yeah. I belong to a group called the Data Leaders. And I got into it sort of by accident. Someone that Maria introduced me to called Tom Redman. And Tom Redman got me involved in this group. And it's a group of about 10 people who are all just incredibly accomplished in the data world. And they're from all over the world, from Australia and Ireland and the US and, everywhere. And there is a thing, you should look at this, it's called thedataleaders.org. It's a site where they've put together a manifesto that says this is what we think about data and how you should be looking at it. It's very interesting. I wish it had more oomph in the world. I wish that we could figure out a way to get people more involved with it, because it does sort of state what we believe, that for 20 years, we've been saying the same thing, and we're not moving the needle very much.
You should write a blog post about that, by the way.
Yeah, I should.
Show those two reports if you can,
Yeah.
side by side. I think that's so fascinating. And, given, Monte Carlo's focus around data quality and data reliability, was just curious your thoughts on where, you think it belongs and where it's going in the future.
Data, there's a saying about if you have data that's wrong in a report, it's going to probably cost you $10 for every element that's wrong. If you caught that same problem when you entered the data, it cost you $1. Mm-hmm. So it's the difference between what you think about quality. Quality starts with wherever the data comes from and wherever it gets entered. Mm-hmm. My best story about this is that when I was at Cisco, we had at Salesforce.com, a system for declaring who our competition was. And we were going to do an analytics project using the competition as that competitive information in order to decide what the next actions were for our marketing team. And we started looking at the quality of the data. And one of our competitors jumped up to the top, and it was 3Com. 3Com was absolutely the number one competitor in most of the opportunities. Do you know why?
Why?
Because 3 is the first thing that comes up on the pull-down menu.
Wow.
Nobody was putting in the information correctly. They were just picking out whatever was there. Yeah. And that sort of taught us, that taught me a whole lot about how it's really important that business process organizations and how they deal with things, and what you actually put in the application that you've driven so hard to do. It used to just always kill me that the Salesforce.com guys would say, yeah, we don't know anything about our customers. Well, okay, here's your profile in Salesforce.com, and it's only 5% complete. Of course you don't know anything about your customers. You're not giving us that data. Oh. And so it's kind of, you start there. And I agree with the quality part and the consistency and the clarity. We got to do that. That's just as important as everything else. Because what I worry about the most now is that a lot of our data streams are going to be picked up by artificial intelligence algorithms. It's not static data any longer. It's streamed data that comes into an algorithm, gets acted upon, and moves something forward. What if it's wrong? What if that data is not right? What happens then? Does someone lose their job? Do I make a bad judgment on an x-ray in a health facility? What is it that it's going to be the ramifications of having really bad data?
Or something even as macro as bad COVID data leads to bad decisions in
exactly.
in government.
I was dealing with some of the guys the other day on analytics, and they were trying to write an algorithm. And one of the things they discovered was that gender made a big deal in being able to select who would be the next best action for whatever they were doing. except that the gender field was only 50% correct. And they only had 50% of that field filled out. It wasn't even possible. So it would have been a nice field to operate on, but how are you going to fill it in?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point. That's so, it is one of those things where you just think, of course, this is how is this even a problem? How is this even a problem?
Exactly. It's a problem because, here you go. Here's the problem, is that when we put in applications inside organizations, we do it because we want speed, okay? Salesforce goes in, we want speed, we want to find out what sales is doing. That's an important thing. And I'm not picking on Salesforce. It's just as bad with SAP or Oracle or anything else you have. But somebody's got to do their job. And so someday somebody comes along and says, well, I don't want to fill in that field because it takes me so much longer to do that. And so they go, okay, don't do that. Or more importantly, here's my favorite too, I need this information and I don't have a field in the data in the application that represents it. So I'm just going to use this field that means something entirely different. And we do it all the time. And that's the problem, is that we don't think about the user experience enough of the applications that we have to make data easy to obtain. And you should understand that from a development perspective.
No, absolutely. And even just like in my day-to-day, sometimes where I want to add something, but I don't want to create a new field or I'm not sure, I just say, well, just put it in the notes section. Just put it in the notes. And then you look at the notes section and you don't know who wrote it, when they wrote it, why they wrote it. Like there's no context. And it actually seems like probably pretty valuable information if it's in the notes section, but you can't do anything with it because you didn't take the time to create the right thing for it.
That's right. Until NLP and artificial intelligence. Now we can take note fields and figure out what you meant.
Well, thank goodness for that. Thank goodness that it's 2020 and we can have that conversation. And my favorite question and the final one, the one that I ask everyone is, if you could have dinner with any other CDO or data leader in the world, who would it be and why?
Oh, who data leader? Well, first of all, it would be Maria. I would go get Maria for dinner because we've had great conversations over dinner. I have a couple of that I really like. Thomas Davenport. Mm-hmm. Thomas Davenport and I have a running argument because he constantly is the consumer side of things, and I keep telling him it's harder in business to business. I would, my friend Tom Redmond is a great resource for those things. And then Doug Lanning from Infonomics. That'd be a great dinner party.
Well, it's a dinner. We'll have to host that dinner party. We can do like a virtual wine tasting.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all of them. That would be great.
It would be great.
Well, thank you so much, Theresa, for your time. I super appreciate it. I've learned so much from you, and I can't wait to. We'll have to do this again.
Well, yeah, and we should keep up. I want to know about your data adventure and how you go forward.
Absolutely, you are on that list now.
Good. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Nisha.
Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of the Data Downtime Show. We hope to see you soon, and for more videos and interviews, go to montecarlodata.com.